In Spain, the defense ministry says soldiers helping to fight the pandemic have found elderly patients in retirement homes abandoned and in some cases dead in their beds. Prosecutors have launched an investigation. Spain is one of the country's worst affected by the coronavirus, and it's been under lockdown for more than a week now. Our correspondent Jan-Philipp Scholz listened to how Spanish people are coping with an exceptional situation.
A solo violinist in an otherwise empty city center, Seville, the capital of Andalusia. In the fight against the spread of the coronavirus, the Spanish government is relying on Spaniards' common sense as well as widespread policing of public spaces. The National Director of Police says there will be zero tolerance, even of minor breaches of the curfew. As this police video shows, even drones are being used to enforce the lockdown. This level of policing used to be unimaginable in Europe. On the square behind me, hundreds of people would meet at this time of the day to have an aperitif together. Life on the streets is an essential part of the Spanish way of life. That makes the discipline that the Spaniards have been showing for more than a week now all the more remarkable. The same is true for their calm reaction after the government announced its plan to extend the lockdown for at least 3 more weeks. Spaniards often share their homes with several family members for financial reasons. Few places in Europe have so little living space per person. There are now countless articles with advice for people who are cooped up at home, ranging from spring cleaning to getting to know your neighbors, at a distance, of course. There is always something to do at home, going shopping, taking out the trash. That's my routine. I just follow the news and watch TV, that's all. We should just obey the rules from the central and local governments. I just hope that the people around me don't get sick if we stick to the rules. But police and aid organizations have warned that domestic violence cases could drastically increase due to the lockdown. Measures could be tightened even further in the weeks ahead, which could mean further restrictions for business and for manufacturing non-critical goods.
The province at the center of China's coronavirus outbreak is to lift travel restrictions on Wednesday. The 50 million people of Hubei province have been under lockdown for 2 months. Those in the capital, Wuhan, will have to wait another 2 weeks before they're allowed to travel. But the easing of restrictions seems to be a sign of progress in China's battle to defeat the coronavirus.
Preparing to get people on the move again. Starting at midnight on Wednesday, the largest lockdown in human history will end. To travel in and out of Hubei, you'll need an electronic tracking code linked to your health status. Green means good to go. But people in the city of Wuhan, where the outbreak began, will have to wait 2 weeks longer to leave the province. Still, for some, restrictions are already lifting. My company got back to work a few days ago. Everybody's been issued a health code after having their physical condition checked and their temperature taken. I got this pass and I'm on my way home after a night shift. Once at the center of China's COVID-19 epidemic, Hubei has seen a dramatic plunge in new cases. Officials have reported just 1 locally transmitted infection in the past 5 days. A tremendous U-turn. This was Wuhan at the height of the outbreak. Crowded hospitals, exhausted medical workers. Hubei has since counted over 67,000 confirmed infections and 3,000 deaths. The WHO says the 2-month lockdown may have averted hundreds of thousands of cases. But it may also have caused a higher mortality rate in the province, as other critical illnesses went untreated. There's hope in Hubei that the worst is over. But with the coronavirus on the loose in China and around the world, risk from imported infection still looms large.
Now let's catch up on some coronavirus stories that are moving around the world. U.S. President Donald Trump says he wants to reopen the country for business in weeks rather than months. Trump was speaking at a daily coronavirus briefing at Washington State as Washington State joined others imposing stay-at-home orders across the U.S. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has tested negative for the coronavirus. Merkel has been working from home in Berlin since Sunday after learning that she had had contact with an infected doctor. She will be tested for the virus again before ending her quarantine. And telephone use has spiked by a third in Germany because of the coronavirus. Telecoms operators say people are making more calls and speaking to each other for longer. It's one sign that people are maintaining their social connections despite restrictions on meeting in person. In the Russian capital, Moscow, thousands of residents have been confined to their homes for 14 days after returning from coronavirus-hit parts of the world. The penalty for defying the quarantine can be harsh, up to 5 years in jail or deportation for foreigners. The city is also building a hospital to deal with the coronavirus outbreak.
What used to be just a field outside the Russian capital will soon be the site of a special hospital built to fight the coronavirus. Construction started just over a week ago. More than 2,000 people are working here around the clock. It's hoped the project will be completed in a month. These piles of dirt are the beginnings of a medical facility that will host around 500 patients, half of the beds for intensive care. In the neighbouring village, people aren't too worried about COVID-19 being on their doorstep. Why be afraid? It's not a war. Everything's fine. They have to build it somewhere, so they're building it here. I'm not afraid. We're old. We don't get out too much anyway. We're careful and disinfect our hands. So far, 2 hospitals within Moscow have been treating coronavirus patients, including this one in the south of the city. The capital currently has the highest number of cases in Russia. The city of Moscow has just told seniors and people at high risk to stay home for several weeks. The whole country has been placed on high alert over the coronavirus. Schools are closed and mass public events have been banned. The government line, including from the president himself, is that the situation is under control and the country is taking the right measures just in time. Luckily, the virus has not spread on such a scale as it has in other countries. In other countries, there are thousands of cases. To avoid having a situation like there, which is not very good, we need preventive measures. But with the number of cases consistently rising every day, Russians have been stocking up on food. Buckwheat, a national favourite, has been widely sold out. That may be due to media reports that authorities could soon introduce stricter measures like a lockdown. The government has so far denied this.
European stocks have been rising rapidly in Tuesday trading, the likes of Germany's DAX rising by around 6% immediately after opening. Asian markets were similarly lifted. Japan's Nikkei closed 7% higher. The South Korean Kospi index rose by 8%. The moves follow the U.S. Federal Reserve's commitment to buy an unlimited number of bonds to lift the U.S. economy. Well, for more on this, we're joined by our market reporter, Chelsea Delaney in Frankfurt. Chelsea, the DAX is stronger today. Is that a reaction to what the Federal Reserve is doing in the U.S.?
Well, the main focus for markets right now is really economic stimulus measures to offset the impact of coronavirus. So on the one hand, the failure of the U.S. Senate to pass that $2 trillion stimulus bill did disappoint investors, but the moves that the Fed has made are really, investors saying, extraordinary. There really has never been such a big and wide-ranging central bank stimulus package in the history of central banking. They're basically ensuring that businesses of all sizes are going to be able to borrow money at very low interest rates, and they're going to spend as much money as necessary to ensure that they do have that liquidity. And that is giving investors more confidence that both businesses and the broader financial system system are going to make it through this crisis intact.
So we're seeing Europe starting off on a positive note today. Asia has already been trading up today. Can we expect this momentum to carry through to Wall Street when it starts trading today?
Yeah, it's really hard to predict these things these days. The markets have been so volatile, and we often see sentiment just turn very, very quickly. Some of the things that investors are going to be watching today are, of course, any more progress from the U.S. Senate on this stimulus bill, but also here in Europe, we're going to be getting some data on the manufacturing sector from March. It's going to be really the first indication of how the Eurozone economy is faring in the face of these shutdowns. And we're also seeing European economies get closer to stimulus bills here. So Germany is expected to vote on a stimulus package this week, and Italy is also getting closer to receiving a rescue package as well.
Chelsea, thank you very much. That was DW's Chelsea Delaney in Frankfurt. Well, here in Germany, the government has ruled that no more than 2 people can be together except for members of the same household in order to contain the coronavirus. Funerals are exempt, although other restrictions mean that burying the dead is not as straightforward as it used to be.
Saying a last goodbye from a distance. First the undertaker, then the priest. Next the urn gets trucked in. And finally the mourners. Burials in the age of coronavirus. Cemetery chapels like this one in Cologne are closed, but funeral home directors otherwise try to stick to the rules. We must either bury the deceased within 10 days or the body must be cremated. We have fewer problems with cremation because once the urn is there, I can wait. It's more difficult to bury a coffin. Then we'd have to do it right away. Many cemeteries try to postpone urn burials if possible. This can be difficult for mourners. Knowing week after week that paying one's last respects, that the funeral will be postponed, I think it gets to be very difficult for the loved ones of the deceased. The contact ban issued on Sunday does not apply to funerals, but close relatives of the deceased are urged to limit the number of mourners in attendance. There may be further restrictions in certain regions, and in some cities, cemeteries will be closed to the public.
In the Serbian capital, Belgrade, the lockdown against the coronavirus has been extended. You used to be able to stay out until 8 o'clock at night, but now you have to be back indoors at 5. Public transport has stopped, and most shops, cafes, and restaurants have been closed. DW visited one family that's having to get used to plenty of togetherness.
Helena Balnozan, her 2 daughters, her father, and her grandmother meet for coffee and cake. Her dog also joins in. 4 generations under one roof. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the curfew has begun. Everyone must stay at home. The hardest thing is our lives have totally changed. I miss my job, but we've seen tough times before. This will pass. Helena is a hairdresser. Since the state of emergency took effect last week, customers have stayed away. Her appointment book is empty. She's earning less and the bills are piling up. There will be hardship for me and everyone in my sector, and all workers in general. I can no longer do my job. But it's justified because we have very close contact with people, and that's risky. It's especially hard for older people. Helena's father, Dragan, is retired, and now he's required to stay home. To prevent the further spread of coronavirus, the government has forbidden people older than 65 from leaving their homes, or pay a 1,500 euro fine. Before the crisis, I took the dog out for a walk twice a day. Now, I mostly sit at my computer. I look at what people are posting on Facebook, but I mostly like playing video games. Children must stay home until further notice. Schools are closed. Lessons are broadcast on public television. But for the girls, the TV presenter is no teacher, and their parents are not their classmates. I have a friend who's no longer allowed to come over and play because of the emergency, and I can't go to her house either. Now Lula spends more time with her sister. At least they can play hide and seek at home. At nightfall, the streets are nearly empty. The curfew goes from 5 o'clock in the evening until 5 in the morning. Belgrade, one of the biggest cities in Southeast Europe, has gone silent because of COVID-19.
Life under lockdown. Well, to talk about the mental health aspect of lockdown, we're joined now by psychiatrist and stress researcher Mazda Adli from the Fliede Clinic here in Berlin. Thanks for joining us this morning. Dr. Adli, forced social distancing is being experienced on a massive scale. As someone who has devoted some time to researching loneliness, what sort of impact do you think this is having on our minds?
Well, we're social beings, that's for sure, and isolation can be a source of stress and burden for our mental well-being, especially if you're already a bit more anxious or if you have a pre-existing mental health condition like a depression. This can be a really challenging time, plus our professional lives, our private lives, our social lives have radically changed almost overnight, and the strategies that we normally use to cope with stress no longer work. We cannot meet our friends, we can't hug each other. So it's a tough and challenging time.
Now, we're also seeing reports of increased domestic violence during the lockdown. People aren't just lonely, some are becoming aggressive. How much potential is there for violence?
Well, the risk for domestic conflicts with increasing time shared within the limited space of an apartment for a family, for example. It's therefore important to really practice a willingness to compromise within families. Don't fight in conflict when you feel angry. Learn to give in when you fight a conflict to cope with these situations.
Is there a difference, Doctor, in the way that teens and children react to this situation compared to, say, adults?
Well, children often react impressively flexible to this situation, and they often show a lot of creativity, for example, in using the situation to create new games, etc. But of course, children can also get anxious and uncertain. And if you, as parents, notice that your child is having a harder time to cope, then it's good to provide good information about the situation, to provide an optimistic perspective overall.
Dr. Adli, thank you very much for talking with us. That was Dr. Mazda Adli from the Fliede Clinic here in Berlin.
You're welcome.